I'm sure I know a lot of people here, but I can't see you.
Well, Commissioner Tisch, welcome to the
Thank you.
92nd Street Y. It's great to have you here. I thought I would open the conversation by setting the context when it comes to public safety here in New York. And I found in preparing for this that it's a task that's actually surprisingly tricky. So on the one hand, there's good news. As I understand it so far through the first 5 months of this year, both homicides and shootings not only are down from their pre-pandemic levels, but they're at modern record lows.
They are.
So that's great.
Yes.
But then there are also press pieces such as the one that was recently penned by Justin Fox and published by Bloomberg, which was entitled, "Why Has New York City Defied the Great American Crime Decline?" And in it, he talks about the fact that though crime is down in New York, it's actually still up from pre-pandemic levels, unlike most of the other major metropolitan areas in the city. And in particular, what he talks about is the fact that while homicides, for example, are down and continue to be much lower than in other cities, I think we're in the bottom 20% or so of cities nationwide, in other violent crime categories like aggravated assault, New York is actually much more dangerous. We're in the top third among these cities. So all of that is by way of background to ask this question. From your perspective, as someone who clearly really understands all the factors at play, what is actually going on when it comes to crime in New York? Is this a city that's safe and is getting safer? Is it a city that's dangerous and getting more dangerous, or is it something else?
I love this question. So let's start with what's going on right now this year in New York City, and then I'm going to take you back a few years. You are correct. This year, crime is going down. Not a little, a lot. Not in one category, in virtually every major felony category. We track at the NYPD the 7 major felonies, and that's how we generally measure whether crime is going up or down. And almost all of the categories this year, crime is going down big. The mayor just announced that from January until May, January through May, we had the safest first 5 months of the year ever in the 32 years of recorded history for gun violence in New York City. We had the lowest number of shootings ever, and we had the lowest number of homicides ever in New York City. And that is absolutely incredible and a testament to the work of the 49,000 members of the New York City Police Department. People say to me, I felt safer in New York City before the pandemic. And for me, the pandemic is a convenient point to use, but something happened at the same time that we had the pandemic. In 2019, we passed in New York State reforms to our criminal justice laws that have rendered the criminal justice system in New York State and frankly in New York City a revolving door for recidivists. Those laws took effect at the beginning of 2020. And so the crime increases that we've seen in the numbers and the crime increases that we feel, our perception of safety. People say, I felt safer before the pandemic. It's like, okay, maybe, but really you felt safer before the criminal justice laws were changed in New York State. In New York City, we do not have a surging crime problem, but we do have a surging recidivism problem. And so that, I think, is like the overall picture of crime in New York now. We are still up, despite the big declines we've seen this year, we are still up, let's say 15% in terms of our 7 major felonies over where we were in 2018, the year before the criminal justice laws were passed.
So I want to come back to this issue of perception in a minute, but since you raised the criminal justice reform changes, that were passed in Albany. I was wondering if maybe you could explain in more detail what exactly happened. People talk about bail reform. They talk about reforms to the discovery laws. When you talk about the changes that have had an impact on crime in New York, is that what you're referring to? And if so, can you explain to people what exactly the changes were?
There were a whole package of laws that were changed virtually at the same time. The flashiest of all of them, the one that we read about or historically have read about the most, has been changes to the bail laws. And yes, bail laws have made it so that more people who, in my opinion, should not be out on the streets or out on the streets as their case unfolds. I would say the two laws that have been most impactful, or the two laws that were changed that have been most impactful in terms of the increases in crime that we have seen in New York City, are first, the discovery law, and second, the raise the age law. And I'll just take each of them one at a time. The discovery law really rendered our criminal justice system a revolving door for recidivists, because it meant that in an unacceptably high number of cases, people were let off based on technicalities that had absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the ultimate outcome of the case. And if I had to pick like the single biggest factor that drove the crime increases that we saw post-criminal justice reform laws, it's definitely the discovery law. This year in the governor's budget, she made some quite significant reforms to that discovery law. And now those changes have given our judges a lot more discretion to keep, if there is a problem with a case, to not let someone off on a technicality if that technicality has no bearing on the ultimate outcome of the case. And so the hope is that with those changes to the discovery law, we are going to see recidivism in New York City start to decline. If you compare 2018, the year before the changes to the laws, to 2024, we saw high double-digit increases in the number of people being arrested 3 or more times in the same year for the same crime. And that very much has terrorized a lot of our neighborhoods, because we have the same people committing the same crimes in the same neighborhoods over and over and over again in a virtually consequence-free environment. The second change to the criminal justice laws that I think was really impactful is one called Raise the Age, where we raised in New York State the age of criminal responsibility. And it has basically meant that youth who commit crime in New York City and New York State also live in a virtually consequence-free environment. I think everyone can agree that kids should not be treated as adults in our criminal justice system, but we really need to relook at some of the choices that were made in the reforms to that law, because they have had the unintended consequence of putting guns in kids' hands and putting kids in the line of fire. Since we raised the age of criminal responsibility in New York State, we have seen an explosion of youth violence. Absolutely unacceptable. We see shooters 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old, not an aberration, all the time. And what's going on now is that gangs are recruiting kids younger and younger. Why? They like the kids to hold the guns because the kids can get away with it. The kids don't face consequences. And we also know that oftentimes when kids are the shooters, kids are also the victims. Kids commit crimes against other kids. And so now my hope is that we will look at that raise the age law in much the same way we've recently looked at and changed the discovery law.
So presumably our leaders in Albany are not pro-crime. Presumably they're not pro-children being injured or killed or committing crimes. Why has it been so difficult, given how stark the statistics are that you're quoting, to change these reforms and to dial them back or to adjust them?
Yeah, I don't want to get in their heads or speak for them, but what I can tell you is I am nothing if not quite clear. And I have been quite clear with all of them in the same way I think I'm being very clear with all of you about what the very real problems are and how I think that we can and should address them. There are solutions to each of these problems. And yes, it has been quite frustrating, the process of getting the laws changed, but I will not stop until we have common sense criminal justice laws in New York City.
So let's turn to another player or group of players in the criminal justice system, the district attorneys. Here in the city, we have 5 district attorneys, one for each of the 5 counties that make up the city. I'm curious what role you think they've played when it comes to creating the environment relating to public safety right now. There was an article in the Daily News in April that said Commissioner Tisch blamed the high recidivism rates on borough district attorneys who take a lighter approach at prosecuting nonviolent and property crimes and either decline cases or effectively dismiss cases through adjournments in contemplation of dismissal. And then in the article, you're quoted as having said, "I've challenged each of them to reevaluate any blanket policy that makes the revolving door spin faster. We've seen even violent repeat offenders be given every courtesy, granted every excuse, and released after being told, please just don't do it again. And guess what? They do it again and again and again because they know that right now the benefits of crime outweigh the consequences."
I nailed it. I said that. I like that.
So at the same time that you've obviously taken the district attorneys on, you've also, I think, spoken positively about the role that they played in some of the negotiations in Albany
Yes.
During this budget cycle. So how would you characterize your relationship with the 5 DAs, and how do you think they're doing?
So the district attorneys are for sure our most important partner at the NYPD. And I do give them a lot of credit for the work that they are doing, both raising the issue of that discovery law that I addressed earlier, and for putting forward, and bless their hearts, negotiating with the state legislature the changes to that discovery law. What I said, and what I was quoted as saying in that article, is also true. I have challenged each of them to look at any blanket policies that exist in their office, even if they were put in place a long time ago, that may make the revolving door of the criminal justice system spin faster. I believe, as I said before, we cannot live in a consequence-free environment. And when people understand that there are consequences, they can make choices about how they want to behave. But for example, we see an explosion of shoplifting in New York City and other major cities around the country. But in New York City, it's causing small businesses to close. It's causing big businesses to close. I had to go get a prescription last summer for my grandmother. In the middle of the night, I couldn't find a 24-hour pharmacy anywhere near me. Remember, there used to be all over the place 24-hour pharmacies. And so the shoplifting is a really big thing. We could bring someone to a district attorney's office we have them on 10 different incidents of shoplifting, and they'll charge one. That guy will be released on their own recognizance, and there will be basically no consequences. All of that adds to the very real problem that we have with recidivism in New York City. And so we have been working with the DAs to get them to think about any policies that they have in their offices that may contribute to this notion of a consequence-free environment in New York City.
And how have they responded?
Quite positively. I would say that across the board, each of the DAs has expressed a willingness and an openness to work with us on this. But the proof is in the pudding. I want to see some of these policies change. Some of them have started to change. And I want to see the prosecution rates in New York City not go up a little, but go up a lot. Imagine how disheartening it is for our cops at the NYPD. They make a great arrest. They put themselves in harm's way to make that arrest. And before they finish their work for the day, the person that they have arrested is back in the precinct picking up their property to go home before them. It is completely demoralizing for our police.
So we started talking about the fact that crime is dropping in the city, which is great.
Baruch Hashem.
But I think that all of us would agree that there's a consensus that something's not right in the city right now when it comes to public safety. The Manhattan Institute in February published a poll of New Yorkers that found that 55% of them felt that New York City had become less safe since 2020, and only 16% felt the opposite. Just this morning, the Citizens Budget Commission released its own poll. 42% of New Yorkers said public safety in their own neighborhoods is excellent or good, which is down from 50% in 2017. The Post published a poll finding that 45% of strap hangers felt safe aboard trains, down 9% versus the fall of 2023. And when I speak to members of our community, and that includes people of all backgrounds from all over the city, I consistently hear the same thing, which is that people are wary, people feel uneasy. And I think that nothing illustrates this better than the experience of walking down into a subway station and seeing everybody pinned against the back wall for fear of being pushed in front of an oncoming train, which we never saw before. So why do you think there's this gap between perception and reality, or is there a gap between perception and reality?
There may be a gap between perception and reality, but if there is one, I think it's small. I think we've spent a lot of time this morning talking about proper crime. There is also, this quality of life stuff. Most people here, if you're lucky, will never be the victim of a crime in New York City. It is still, per capita, the safest big city in the country. But everyone here sees basically every day, every time they leave their home, every time they go to work, every time they drop their kids off, something about quality of life that is unacceptable. That could be aggressive vending or panhandling, unreasonable noise, an out-of-control e-bike careening down the streets. All of these quality of life issues lead to the perception of chaos and disorder. And I think that plays a part, it's not the whole story, but a part in this feeling that the city is less safe. And so at the NYPD, one of the things that we have done recently is we have created this quality of life division where we're putting cops in every precinct whose only job it is to respond to these quality of life concerns through our 311 system in much the same way that historically they have responded quite well to 911. And the idea here is to make 311 response in the police department more akin to 911 response. Obviously, emergencies are always going to have to be the priority, but I think historically the police department has not done the best job in responding to quality of life concerns. That's above ground. Below ground is something very similar. Below ground, if you look back at the data, the NYPD has done a really good job of enforcing the laws, making arrests for felonies and for misdemeanors that occur in our transit system. What we basically stopped doing 8 years ago, was enforcing the very basic rules of the transit system. No smoking in transit, no drinking in transit, no laying outstretched in transit. All of those things lead to the feeling of chaos in the subway, and they also make people feel less safe. And so over the past 3 or 4 months, we've gone borough by borough where we've said to our cops in transit, you are now back to enforcing the very basic rules of the transit system. And we have gotten a lot of very good feedback from people on the trains about that work. We have also flooded the subway system with cops because we know that when people see cops in transit, they feel safe. I'll just say on transit here, crime in the transit system, recorded crime in transit, is lower than it was pre-pandemic. And it is at the lowest level that it has been, except for the years of the pandemic when no one was using the subways. But that doesn't really matter if people don't feel safe. So a lot of the initiatives now are, yes, designed to crack down on crime, but more designed to make people feel safe in transit.
You talked about drinking on the subway, smoking on the subway, laying out on the subway. There's also fare evasion. The New York Times in August of last year said that 14% of subway riders failed to pay their fare and 48% of bus riders failed to do so. And the MTA itself said that in 2023 they lost $700 million to fare evasion, which, if my numbers are correct, is about $200 million more than the MTA is supposed to get from congestion pricing this year. I bet everyone here has seen people brazenly jumping over the turnstile. From the perspective of the police department, how serious is this problem and what are you doing about it?
I think one thing we haven't discussed yet is the overall number of cops that we have in New York City. I spent most of my career at the police department. I left for 5 years to run sanitation and other agencies, and I came back about 6 months ago. When I left the police department 5.5 years ago, we were about 39,000 uniformed members of the service. Today, we're at about 34,000 uniformed members of the police department. That's not a budgetary issue. That is, we can't find the people who want to become police officers in New York City anymore. It used to be that if you took the police test and you passed, you may have to wait 3, 4, 5 years to get your opportunity to get into the police academy. Now, we are virtually begging people to take the police test. And when they pass that test, they are in the next class, sometimes like 2 months later. And I would say that there are a lot of factors that have gone into really depressing interest in young people becoming police. Among them, the defund and anti-police movements, the incredibly vile rhetoric that has been hurled against our police, both in New York City and really across this country. And in my opinion, it is unacceptable. Policing is among the most noble professions that anyone could take on. These are the people who run toward the danger when everyone else is running away. And it's not just the rhetoric against the police. It's also some of the laws that make the personal responsibility that they have to take on just to become police officers, just to serve the city. It makes it not worth it for a lot of people who otherwise would have chosen careers of service. So, very long way to get to your actual question, which is fare evasion. Do we have to enforce fare evasion? Absolutely. And we do. We cannot have lawlessness. I believe we have to enforce the laws as they exist. But we cannot continue to devote all of our subway police resources to fare evasion, which we were doing 7 months ago. And the reason we can't do that is we know that 75% of the crime that occurs in the transit system occurs on the platforms and on the trains. That is where you need the police, especially when the police are such a limited resource these days. And so we have pulled some of our officers away from the turnstiles and put them on the platforms and on the trains, and that is why we are seeing real declines in crime in the transit system. Fare evasion is also something that the MTA can hire civilians, non-uniform people, to enforce. Sometimes it's as simple as closing the ADA gate that people just stream through. So we have to look at solutions to the problems that are bigger than just assigning a police officer to it.
So let's talk about another category of nuisance crimes that often become more than nuisance crimes. You mentioned e-bikes. My wife, a few years ago, was stepping into the street to cross on Lexington Avenue, and a bike going the wrong way down the avenue knocked her over. She broke her elbow. And I know lots of people who have had similar experiences. Recently, I understand that the police department has decided to be more aggressive about enforcing some of the rules when it comes to e-bikes, and that's garnered a fair amount of controversy, although apparently not in this room.
But I just want to say, not in this room. At whatever borough I go to in the city of New York, people thank me for the enforcement of e-bikes. They complain about out-of-control e-bikes careening through crosswalks, running red lights, driving up on the sidewalks, creating hazardous conditions. And historically, the police department's enforcement of the rules of the road as it relates to bikes use the same type of summons that we would give to drivers of cars that are committing similar types of infractions, and that is a traffic summons. The problem with that type of enforcement for e-bikes is it's virtually meaningless, because the only reason, or the main reason, people pay a traffic ticket or show up at traffic court or follow the rules of the road is because they don't want points on their license, or they don't want their license suspended. With e-bikes, there are no licenses. And so by giving them a traffic summons, it's basically burning police resources. It is meaningless enforcement. And so recently, based on the complaints and the feedback that the mayor and I have gotten at town halls, community council meetings, meetings at senior centers, where, I'm sorry that happened to your wife. I can't tell you how many people have given me the same type of story or told me about pulling their child out of the way of a careening e-bike. We switched the type of enforcement we're doing, and we're now giving a different type of summons, which is called a C summons or a criminal summons, which means that the person who receives that summons has to appear in criminal court. Doesn't go on their rap sheet, they don't get fingerprinted, but they do have to appear before a judge. And what the judges have been doing, I think they've been handling it very well, is that they have been giving them what's called ACDs, which is basically to say, don't do it again. You come 90 days, 60 days, 90 days, no infractions, and this goes away. But there will be very real consequences for you if you are back in this court, in the next time period. And so that meaningful enforcement, I believe, actually will work. And unless and until our city council changes the laws and the regulatory framework for how we govern this mode of transportation that has exploded in New York City over the past decade, that C summons is the best enforcement mechanism that we have.
So I want to talk about another area that I think creates this sense of lawlessness or impunity on the streets, which is the recreational use of marijuana. In 2021, the state legalized the use of marijuana, and by the following year, as I understand it, regular use of marijuana increased by 50% in the state. As more states are legalizing marijuana, we're finding out that there are all sorts of very serious health effects to the use of marijuana. Maybe because of this, maybe for different reasons. When the state legalized marijuana, it didn't do so absolutely. You can't smoke while driving. You can't smoke while sitting in a parked car. You can't possess or use marijuana if you're under 21. You can't smoke in parks or on beaches. You can't smoke in NYCHA residences. And you can't smoke within 100 feet of churches, schools, libraries, hospitals, and daycare facilities. I walk down the streets of New York every day, and I think every one of those rules is violated with regularity. Going back to this question of perception, is there nothing that the police department or anyone else can do about this?
Look, in New York State, as you mentioned, our legislators made the decision to legalize it. And the smell of marijuana that you get like virtually everywhere, that is not based on just like one person smoking within 100 feet of a church. The fact is, people are using the law to its fullest extent. We smell it, we see it, we feel it. My opinion, no amount of enforcement of those quite small carve-outs is going to make a meaningful difference. Do we enforce those things? Absolutely. But our enforcement of that is not going to change the perception that was created by the changes in the laws in New York State as they relate to marijuana. No judgment from me on those laws one way or the other, but like the small carve-out enforcement areas is not going to be needle moving.
So let's talk about something that is not a perception but is clearly a reality, which is the very disturbing increase in bias crimes directed at the Jewish community. These incidents accelerated dramatically after October 7th, when many Jews and Jewish organizations were targeted for support of Israel's right to exist or just for being Jewish. Here in New York, we had a notorious incident where a pro-Palestinian protester at Union Square insisted that all Zionists exit a subway train. In the last month, we've seen horrific events. This weekend's attack in Boulder, the murder of 2 Israeli embassy employees at an American Jewish Committee event in Washington. Last year, as I understand it, 54% of all reported hate crimes in New York City targeted Jews, which means that Jews were targeted more than any other group combined. Even though we account for 12% of the city's population. Here at the 92nd Street Y, we've had aggressive protesters interrupt events and accuse patrons of supporting murder and genocide. We've experienced property damage and graffiti. We used to spend $2.7 million a year on security. We're now spending $4 million a year on security. As both the New York Police Department commissioner and a Jew, how do you think New York's Jewish population should feel right now?
So all of the statistics that you cited, I thought you might ask this, so I brought some statistics, but all of the ones that you just cited are correct. Jews make up roughly 10% of the population of New York City, and Jews account for over 50% of the hate crimes. We saw an explosion of hate crimes after October 7th. Going into October 7th, actually hate crimes against Jews were trending down. The next year, they were up 80%. And they have been up also the following year. In the 20 months since October 7th, we have seen hate crimes against Jews in New York City go in one direction, and that is up. We do have a hate crimes task force. Our hate crimes task force at the NYPD does investigate every instance of a bias or a hate crime, but these are clearly unacceptable numbers. What happened in Boulder is unfortunately the latest in a growing pattern of rhetoric around the war in the Middle East, shifting from outrage to incitement, from slogans now to direct calls for violence. And unfortunately, as we saw first with or most recently with the attack on the Jewish Museum in Washington, and then the attack in Boulder the other day, these calls are now being answered. And I'll just be honest with you, every high-profile attack raises the risk of another. Individuals who are already on the edge, they don't need instructions. They need a spark. And what we are doing at the NYPD is working tirelessly, feverishly, to make sure that none of these sparks catch fire. Let me tell you a bit about that work. First, immediately following the attack on the Jewish Museum in Washington, we surged an unprecedented number of resources in terms of cops, heavy weapons teams, police cars to go to Jewish sites, Jewish cultural sites, Jewish schools, Jewish institutions, Jewish diplomatic sites. So we've really blanketed those sites with police resources, and we are not going to let up from that. But the other thing that we do is we have these very important partnerships with federal agencies, the most important of which, my opinion, is our partnership with the FBI through the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We work cases together with them, and we do a lot of work to, behind the scenes, things you don't see, to make sure that any lead that we get, any person that we think may be about to commit an act of violence, that we are on top of those cases and that we are handling them quite aggressively.
We have some questions from the audience, and you mentioned partnership with the federal government. I'm curious, or a member of our audience is curious, how the NYPD these days is working with the federal government when it comes to immigration enforcement.
Yeah. So in New York City, we have sanctuary city laws, and we follow those laws to the letter of the law. At the NYPD, we do not engage in civil immigration enforcement, period. Will pursue criminals regardless of their immigration status. And we do have very strong, as I mentioned, federal partnerships with the FBI, with the DEA, with Homeland Security investigations, where we work jointly with the federal agencies to go after criminals regardless of their immigration status.
Another question from the audience. Mental health seems to be an issue on the streets of New York City. What can the NYPD do about the mentally ill on the streets? It's scary to walk around.
So I've worked in government. I'm going into my 18th year soon. I can't believe that. But during, when the pandemic started in 2020, and through I would say the 2 years of the pandemic, I saw government, local government, really government at all levels, step up and do things that I never thought possible. A citywide vaccination system, a citywide contact tracing system, almost 1 million iPads sent to public school students at their home for remote learning, online marriages. When a real crisis occurred, I saw government do things that were bigger, faster, and more impactful than I ever imagined government could or would. In my opinion, the mental health crisis, which really has spiked since the pandemic, is at that crisis level where we can no longer accept small solutions or medium solutions. We need only big crisis level solutions. Is the NYPD a part of that? Sure. Are we the main event in that? Absolutely not. The police department, we exercise our ability to take people who we believe to be in mental health crisis off the streets. We bring them to hospitals. We do this thousands and thousands and thousands of times a year. And you know what happens? They get released 2 hours later. My opinion, this problem doesn't get solved. We don't make a dent in this problem unless other parts of government expand the capacity at our medical facilities and our hospitals to really treat people who are in mental health crisis. But like this pattern, the cycle that we've gotten into of the police taking people off the street and then them being released 2 hours later, and then we encounter them the next day. That's literally how this works. We know our standard customers for this, and they are repeatedly go through the same cycle.
And this was another issue in the budget negotiation in Albany, involuntary commitment of the mentally ill, kind of like with the discovery law reforms. It's a little bit hard as an outsider to understand how meaningful the changes were. How do you assess those?
So if I can just put it in the context of what I just said, the police have long had, for a while, the ability to remove people from the streets that we believe are in mental health crisis and bring them to hospitals. My understanding is that one piece of the changes in the laws give more flexibility to doctors and medical professionals as it relates to the people who are brought there in mental health crisis. But as I said before, I don't see how this problem is solved in a meaningful, systemic way unless and until we expand the capacity in our medical facilities to address the scale of the problem.
So we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to combine two questions, and two members of our audience had questions not about you as police commissioner, but about you as a person. So the first question, they're good questions, was could you talk about how your past positions in the private and public sector prepared you to be police commissioner? And then the second is, can you talk about your time as sanitation commissioner?
Yes.
And what you did to change
Love that
the
job.
trash issue and everyone's favorite issue, rats.
Yes. So I will say the only numbers better right now than our shooting and homicide numbers in New York City are our rat numbers. Historically in New York City, rat complaint numbers to 311 have only gone in one direction, and that is up. And this year, rat complaints in New York City are down I think over 20%. I get the number every morning at 5 a.m. It's the first thing I check. The crime numbers come in a little later at 6. I'm not kidding. But I just loved being sanitation commissioner. And the reason I love being sanitation commissioner is because I, in my career, have never accepted the status quo when the status quo does not serve New Yorkers. And every day in New York City, we leave 44 million pounds of trash on our curbs in garbage bags, and then all night. And then we sit around and we wonder why we have a trash problem. And forever, every other city on the globe has done something other, which is to put their trash in containers, sometimes as simple as wheelie bins. And in New York City, we're like, oh no, we could never do that. And I was like, yes, we can, and we will. And so seeing the move from trash in garbage bags into containers, which is complete for all businesses and for all 1 to 9 unit buildings, has been great. And I am looking forward to my old agency, the sanitation department, now doing the same thing for high density residential buildings, where they are putting European style on street containers. They are assigning them to buildings of 30 units or more. And we developed this special sanitation truck, which they have in Europe, but not in the United States, that hoists these 4 cubic yard containers and dumps them, and it is just like the most beautiful sight. They just got this up and running in West Harlem, which is the first fully containerized district in all of New York City, and I hope and pray that this gets rolled out district by district. That's the vision and the plan.
So before concluding, I want to come back just briefly to the police department. You talked about some of the challenges that you're facing with recruitment and number of people who are retiring and leaving the police force. Very famously, when you came into office, you, let's say, cleaned house and exposed what I guess at best could be characterized as misdeeds and at worst could be characterized as pretty widespread corruption. Where do you think you are in terms of whipping the police department into shape and making the police department the department that New Yorkers need and deserve?
So I have very high standards, I have very high standards for myself, obviously. I also have very high standards, always have, for the people who work with and for me. And one of the great blessings of my career is that in any agency I've worked at, in any job I've worked at, the people who have worked with me have always risen to meet those standards. And I am here today to report that the New York City Police Department, 6 months in, the executive team at the police department has risen to meet the standards that I have set. And I am very comfortable that we are on a good trajectory. I told them that scandal at the executive level, first, of course, it erodes public confidence in the police. It makes people feel less safe. But it also takes away from the noble, incredible, heroic work that our cops are doing day in and day out. And that we all owe it to our police to not distract from or detract from the incredible work that they do every day on behalf of 8.5 million New Yorkers.
So building off of that response, let's end on a positive note.
Okay.
Can you tell us what, in your opinion, gives you optimism about the future of New York City?
Yes, I can. In my job, I see some of the worst of things. I see tragedy, I see heartbreak, I see victimization, I see crime, not once in a while, all day, every day. And that can get a little draining. but I also see the best of us. Seeing up close and personal the work that the police, your police, do on a daily basis on behalf of all of us to make New York City the safest big city in America, it is just extraordinary. Anytime a cop gets seriously injured, I try to go to the hospital to visit them. A few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was with a cop who had his finger bitten off. I was with another cop who had been savagely beaten and many bones in his face broken. And when you sit and you talk to them in their weakest and most vulnerable moments, time and again, they talk about the importance of their work, their calling to serve. Don't worry, Commissioner, I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna get right back out on the streets, and the people of my neighborhood need me. And so when I hear this terrible, vile rhetoric about the police, when all of you hear it, think about that. These people who are really the best of us that put their lives on the line every day to keep us all safe.
Well, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to those officers. We also owe a debt of gratitude to you for your service.
You.
So please join me in thanking Commissioner
Thank
Tisch.
you.
And we hope that you'll join us again here at the 92nd Street Y. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.